The ocean is the last place you would expect a war to unfold. Its vastness feels eternal, untouched, indifferent to the conflicts of humankind. And yet, beneath its surface, in the cold, crushing darkness, a hidden war once raged. A war fought not with armies and cities, but with shadows and silence. It was a war so secret, most of its battles were never acknowledged, its victories never celebrated, its casualties never named. It was the secret war beneath the ocean. From the late 1940s to the final years of the Cold War, the superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, waged a conflict in places where no one could see. While tanks rolled across Europe and spies traded secrets in Berlin alleyways, another battlefield was taking shape thousands of meters underwater. Nuclear submarines, floating fortresses of steel, became the weapons of choice. They were invisible, undetectable, and armed with enough firepower to end civilization itself. But here's the chilling truth. This underwater war wasn't just about deterrence. It wasn't only about having missiles ready to strike. It was about hunting and being hunted. Submarines stalked each other in the darkness, sonar pings echoing like whispers in the deep, captains making split-second decisions that could mean survival or nuclear war. Imagine this. Somewhere in the North Atlantic, two submarines silently circle one another. They cannot be seen. They can barely be heard. Their sonar operators listen to faint noises, the hum of a propeller, the creak of a hull under pressure. One wrong interpretation, one aggressive maneuver, and the Cold War could have turned hot in an instant. These moments happen not once, not twice, but hundreds of times. And the world never knew. To understand this shadow war, we need to go back to its beginning. In the aftermath of World War II, the Soviet Union and the United States emerged as titans, each seeking dominance in every domain: land, air, space, and sea. Nuclear weapons became the ultimate trump card. But there was a problem. Stationary missile silos could be targeted and destroyed. Airplanes carrying bombs could be intercepted. What was needed was something invisible, mobile, unstoppable. The answer: submarines armed with nuclear missiles. The U.S. was the first to perfect this technology, launching the USS George Washington in 1960, the world's first ballistic missile submarine. The Soviets, determined not to fall behind, rushed to build their own fleet. And so began a cat-and-mouse game under the waves, a race to patrol the oceans with these silent killers. But this wasn't just about deterrence. Submarines became instruments of espionage. American subs trailed Soviet vessels for weeks at a time, recording their sonar signatures, learning their patterns, mapping their routes. Soviet submarines, in turn, prowled the coasts of the United States, waiting in silence for orders that, thankfully, never came. The technology of this war was staggering. Submarines were designed to be quieter than a whisper, their propellers engineered to avoid detection. Sonar operators trained for years to recognize the faintest sounds, the difference between a whale's call and the mechanical thrum of a reactor. Entire naval strategies hinged on silence. He who remained undetected survived, and sometimes silence failed. Declassified reports tell us of terrifying near collisions deep under the Arctic ice, where American and Soviet submarines brushed against each other's hulls, their crews hearing the screech of steel against steel in the crushing dark. In those moments, both captains knew one truth. Had missiles been launched, the world above would never have known why. But this underwater war was not just fought with machines, it was fought with people. Life inside a submarine was brutal. Crews spent months sealed inside cramped steel tubes, cut off from sunlight, breathing recycled air, knowing that at any moment they could be detected, hunted, and destroyed. A single error could cost hundreds of lives, and perhaps spark World War III. One American submariner described it as living in a coffin with 100 other souls, always listening for the sound of death. A Soviet veteran recalled the crushing silence of long patrols, broken only by the captain's voice ordering evasive maneuvers. To these men, the ocean was not vast and free. It was claustrophobic, suffocating, an invisible battlefield where survival depended on discipline, silence, and steel nerves. And it wasn't only submarines that took part in this secret conflict. Hidden beneath the waves were also the arteries of the modern world. Undersea cables carrying vast amounts of information. Both the US and the Soviet Union sought ways to tap into them, to steal communications that could shift the balance of power. Submarines were modified with special equipment to sneak up to cables lying on the seabed, clipping devices onto them like thieves attaching stethoscopes to a safe. The information gathered could reveal military deployments, nuclear codes, entire state secrets. This was espionage at its most daring. Divers in heavy gear ventured into the dark, icy waters to complete missions where one slip meant death. And yet they did it again and again because the prize was worth it. Knowledge that could decide the fate of nations. But here's what makes this story chilling. These operations were so secret, even many generals and politicians never knew they were happening. Incidents that could have sparked global war were buried under classified seals, dismissed as accidents, or never acknowledged at all. For example, in 1968, a Soviet submarine armed with nuclear missiles mysteriously disappeared in the Pacific Ocean. The US launched a secret mission, codenamed Project Azorian, to recover it from 3 miles beneath the surface. Officially, the operation never happened. Unofficially, it revealed just how far nations were willing to go to dominate the secret war under the sea. And that's just one example. Countless others remain buried in classified archives, their details too dangerous, too embarrassing, or too terrifying to reveal. What we know is enough to paint a picture. The ocean floor is littered with wrecks, the graves of submarines that never returned. To the world, these were tragedies of navigation or unexplained losses. To those who understand, they were casualties of a war that never made headlines. So why don't we hear more about this? Why isn't this hidden war part of our collective memory? The answer is chillingly simple, because silence was the point. To admit the truth would have risked panic, escalated tensions, or revealed vulnerabilities. Better to keep it buried, literally and figuratively, beneath the waves. And yet, the silence cannot last forever. With each declassified document, with each explorer who uncovers a wreck, pieces of the puzzle surface. We are beginning to see the outlines of a shadow war that was as dangerous, as dramatic, and as consequential as any fought on land. But this is only the beginning, because what happened under the ocean wasn't just espionage, and it wasn't just near misses. There were moments when the world truly came within a breath of annihilation. Incidents so shocking they were buried for decades. And once you hear them, you'll never look at the ocean the same way again. By the mid-1960s, the secret war beneath the ocean was no longer theoretical, it was fully underway. Both the United States and the Soviet Union had built fleets of nuclear submarines, each capable of carrying dozens of warheads. These subs patrolled silently, always moving, never staying in the same place for long. The world above saw peace, or at least the uneasy balance of the Cold War. But below, the seas churned with tension. The ocean had become the ultimate chessboard. Every move was dangerous, every countermove invisible. American submarines shadowed Soviet ones across the North Atlantic, trailing them so closely that sonar operators could hear the groan of their rivals' metal hull bending under pressure. Soviet captains, in turn, pushed their crews to elude the Americans, diving deep into the blackness, sometimes so deep that their hulls creaked like bones ready to snap. And yet, for all the advanced technology, it often came down to human senses. Ears pressed against hydrophones, instincts sharpened by fear, decisions made in seconds that could alter history forever. One of the most dangerous moments came in 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. While the world above fixated on the standoff between Kennedy and Khrushchev, the ocean nearly became the trigger for nuclear war. For Soviet submarines were deployed to the Caribbean, each armed with a nuclear-tipped torpedo. American destroyers hunted them relentlessly, dropping practice depth charges to force them to surface. But to the Soviet crews trapped inside sweltering steel tubes, cut off from Moscow, those explosions sounded like the beginning of war. On one submarine, the B-59, the captain and political officer believed war had already started. They wanted to launch their nuclear torpedo at the American fleet. Only the calm refusal of one man, Vasily Arkhipov, the second in command, prevented catastrophe. Arkhipov argued that they should wait for clear orders. His defiance saved the world from nuclear war. And yet, for decades, no one outside the Soviet Navy even knew his name. This incident was not unique. Time and again, submarines became the stage for close calls, their crews trapped in situations where silence, miscommunication, or sheer exhaustion nearly sparked the unthinkable. But the secret war wasn't just about near misses, it was about intelligence. The United States launched some of the boldest espionage missions in history to tap Soviet communications. One of the most daring was Operation Unveils in the early 1970s. Using modified submarines, American divers secretly descended to the bottom of the Sea of Okhotsk, deep inside Soviet territorial waters. There, they located an undersea communication cable used by the Soviet Pacific Fleet. With extraordinary precision, they attached a recording device that intercepted every message passing through the line. For years, this device quietly fed Washington a treasure trove of Soviet secrets, battle plans, submarine movements, even conversations between commanders. It was intelligence so sensitive, so valuable, that it was guarded at the highest levels. The Soviets had no idea their most private communications were being siphoned off from the seafloor. Until, betrayal struck. In the 1980s, a former NSA employee named Ronald Pelton sold the secret of Operation Unveils to the Soviets for just $35,000. The cable was destroyed, the operation compromised, and America's most successful act of undersea espionage was lost. The betrayal cost lives and changed the balance of the silent war. The Soviets, for their part, were no less daring. Their submarines prowled the American coastlines, sometimes within striking distance of major cities. In the late 1970s, reports surfaced of Soviet Yankee-class submarines operating off the eastern seaboard, their missile tubes aimed at New York and Washington. The U.S. Navy scrambled to track them, deploying hunter-killer submarines to shadow every move. It was a deadly cat-and-mouse game, fought in absolute silence, far from public view. And sometimes silence broke in the most violent ways. In 1968, the Soviet submarine K-129 vanished in the Pacific Ocean, taking all 98 crewmen with it. Officially, the Soviets claimed it was lost to an accident. Unofficially, whispers spread of a catastrophic explosion, possibly even a failed missile launch. The United States saw an opportunity. In one of the most audacious covert operations of the Cold War, the CIA launched Project Azorian, a mission to raise the sunken submarine from a depth of over 16,000 feet. Using a specially constructed ship disguised as a mining vessel, the Americans attempted to lift the wreck from the ocean floor. The operation was only partially successful. The submarine broke apart during recovery. But what was brought up provided priceless intelligence. To this day, much of what the CIA recovered remains classified, fueling speculation about what secrets lay inside that submarine's shattered hull. Nuclear weapons? Codes? Or perhaps evidence of something far darker? The Soviets, meanwhile, faced their own disasters. In 1989, the submarine K-278 Komsomolets, one of their most advanced nuclear-powered subs, caught fire and sank in the frigid waters of the Barents Sea. 42 men perished. The tragedy was officially reported as an accident, but many believe the full story was buried. Survivors spoke of heroic efforts to save the submarine, of compartments flooding while sailors held doors shut with their bodies, sacrificing themselves so others could escape. The Komsomolets carried nuclear torpedoes, and its wreck still lies at the bottom of the sea, a radioactive time bomb. Each of these incidents, shrouded in secrecy, reveals the terrifying stakes of the undersea war. Submarines weren't just machines. They were coffins of steel, sailing into silence with crews who understood that their mission might never be acknowledged, even in death. And yet, the war beneath the ocean wasn't only about East versus West. Nature itself was an enemy. Submariners spoke of the crushing darkness, the disorientation of endless days without sunlight, the claustrophobia of recycled air. A single fire, a single malfunction could doom an entire crew. Unlike soldiers on land, there was no escape, no surrender. The ocean allowed no mercy. Despite the risks, both sides continued to push further, deeper, bolder. Submarines became faster, quieter, deadlier. By the 1980s, The seas were crowded with invisible hunters, each one listening, waiting, daring the other to make a mistake. And mistakes did happen. Submarines collided in silence, their captains forced to limp home with battered hulls. The incidents hushed up to avoid diplomatic crises. In one infamous case in 1992, even after the Cold War had ended, a U.S. submarine collided with a Russian submarine in the Barents Sea, proving that the silent war never truly ended. It simply changed shape. What's most chilling is this. Most of these stories only came to light decades later. At the time, families of lost sailors were given vague explanations, if any at all. The public remained blissfully unaware that their lives had come within inches of annihilation. Not once, but dozens of times. Because in the secret war beneath the ocean, the line between peace and catastrophe was as thin as the steel hull of a submarine. And the deeper we go, the more terrifying the stories become. Because what if I told you there were moments when submarines carried nuclear weapons, and the order to use them was almost given? Moments when captains had to decide, with no guidance from above, whether the world would end that day. Those moments existed, and they are perhaps the most frightening stories of the Cold War. Imagine this. You're trapped inside a steel cylinder, hundreds of meters below the ocean's surface. The air is stale, the walls sweat with condensation, and every creak of the hull reminds you that one wrong maneuver could crush the submarine like a soda can. But the greatest weight pressing on you isn't the ocean. It's the responsibility resting on your shoulders. For inside this submarine are nuclear weapons, each one powerful enough to erase a city in seconds. During the Cold War, there were moments when submarine commanders held the power of Armageddon in their hands. And what's terrifying is just how close they came to using it. We already saw how Vasily Arkhipov prevented nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis aboard the B-59. But that was only one of many incidents. Again and again, submariners faced scenarios where confusion, exhaustion, and miscommunication nearly triggered the unthinkable. Take November 1969, when a U.S. Navy nuclear submarine, the USS Gato, collided with a Soviet submarine in the icy waters of the Barents Sea. The impact was so severe that both crews feared the other side might interpret it as an act of aggression. Imagine the panic. The sonar operators hearing a massive crash, commanders barking orders in the dark, both vessels scrambling to regain control. Neither submarine fired, but for a few tense minutes, the world teetered on the edge of war, all because two invisible hunters literally bumped into each other in the deep. But perhaps the most chilling case came in 1983, a year many historians consider one of the most dangerous in Cold War history. The Soviet Union was on high alert, fearing that NATO military exercises were a cover for a surprise nuclear strike. Soviet submarines prowled the oceans with instructions to remain vigilant. In one documented case, a submarine captain misinterpreted sonar signals as evidence of an American attack. Protocol would have allowed him to prepare his nuclear weapons. He hesitated, and by doing so, likely saved millions of lives. It's easy to imagine these men as cold, calculating officers. But the truth is, they were human beings under unimaginable stress. Days blurred together. Crewmen described hallucinations, paranoia, and crushing anxiety. Some compared the experience to living in a coffin, surrounded by death on all sides. And in the middle of this mental strain, they had to decide whether to unleash weapons that would change history forever. Nowhere is this more evident than in the haunting story of the K-129. We touched on its mysterious sinking earlier, but what many don't know is the theory that the submarine may have been on a rogue mission. Some intelligence analysts believe the K-129 might have attempted to launch a missile at Hawaii without authorization, perhaps due to mechanical failure, or perhaps a breakdown in communication. The truth has never been confirmed, but the idea that a single submarine crew, cut off from Moscow, might have nearly started nuclear war is enough to send chills down your spine. The Americans, too, carried similar burdens. U.S. ballistic missile submarines, known as boomers, spent months at sea, lurking in silence, ready to fire at a moment's notice. Their job was not glamorous. It was to wait. Wait for a message that might never come, a signal that could mean the end of civilization. And because submarines had to remain hidden, communication was often delayed or impossible. commanders had to consider the most horrifying scenario. What if the United States had already been destroyed, and they were left with orders to retaliate? This possibility was known as the doomsday scenario. Submarine crews trained for it constantly, launching missiles not as an act of aggression, but as vengeance for a homeland that might no longer exist. Imagine being ordered to destroy cities you would never see, for people who might already be gone. It was the ultimate test of loyalty, and it haunted every sailor aboard those subs. And then came the near disasters hidden from the world. In 1974, a Soviet submarine carrying nuclear torpedoes caught fire in the Arctic Ocean. The blaze spread through compartments, threatening to detonate the weapons. The crew fought desperately, sealing themselves into burning chambers to slow the spread of the flames. Some suffocated, others burned alive. But they contained the fire, and the world never knew how close it had come to a radioactive catastrophe. A similar event unfolded in 1986 with the Soviet submarine K-219, which suffered an explosion in one of its missile tubes while patrolling near Bermuda. The blast tore through the sub, flooding compartments with toxic gases. One sailor, Sergei Preminin, manually lowered the reactor's control rods to prevent a nuclear meltdown. He was trapped inside as the compartment sealed shut, sacrificing his life to save not only his crew, but perhaps millions of people on the U.S. East Coast. His name remained obscure for years, hidden behind layers of Soviet secrecy. These men, Arkhipov, Preminin, and countless others, are unsung heroes of a war that was never declared. They lived and died in shadows, preventing disasters we may never fully comprehend. But the most unsettling part of this story is not the heroism. It's the secrecy. Governments on both sides covered up these near catastrophes, terrified of public backlash, terrified of revealing vulnerabilities. Families of lost submariners were often given vague explanations, if any at all. The truth was buried beneath classified documents, whispered only in corridors of power. And yet, fragments of truth still surface. Retired officers' memoirs, declassified files, they reveal glimpses of how close we came. And the picture they paint is terrifying. The world did not survive the Cold War because of flawless strategy or perfect technology. It survived because individuals, often in impossible situations, chose restraint over destruction. But restraint is fragile, and the ocean was not done testing the limits of human judgment. Because the undersea war wasn't just fought with submarines. It was fought with listening posts, spy operations, and technological races to outwit the other side. Each breakthrough, each secret mission pushed the boundaries further. If a single submarine commander could decide the fate of millions, what about the intelligence agencies trying to anticipate those decisions? What about the missions launched not to fight, but to steal secrets from the ocean floor itself? That is where the secret war grows even stranger. Because in the 1970s and 1980s, the oceans became the stage for some of the boldest spy operations in history, missions so daring they sound like fiction, yet they were real. And the question is, how many of those missions are still hidden, buried in classified archives, waiting to be discovered? We may never know, but what we do know is this. The Cold War could have ended 100 different ways, many of them beginning in the silent corridors of a submarine. And some of the most shocking episodes, the ones that make your skin crawl, are only just coming to light. Because beneath the ocean, there are secrets still too dangerous to tell. By the 1970s, the Cold War had become less about tanks and missiles and more about intelligence. Whoever controlled information would control the future. And beneath the world's oceans, a hidden battlefield emerged. One where silence was the weapon, and secrecy was the prize. The oceans were not just hiding submarines, they were hiding the veins of the modern world. Submarine communication cables, stretching thousands of miles across the seafloor. These cables carried military orders, encrypted messages, and the heartbeat of the superpowers. If you could tap into those arteries, you could hear the enemy's pulse. The United States realized this early. The National Security Agency, working with the Navy, launched one of the most audacious espionage operations in history, Ivy Bells. Picture this. A nuclear-powered submarine slipping silently into Soviet waters in the Sea of Okhotsk, an area so heavily guarded the Soviets called it their backyard. On board was a team of divers trained for a mission that bordered on suicide. Their task? To descend hundreds of feet into freezing black waters and attach a wiretap to a Soviet undersea cable. It sounds impossible, but they did it. The device they planted was ingenious. It recorded conversations without interrupting the cable's flow, storing the information on tapes that divers would later retrieve. Month after month, the Americans returned, pulling secrets from the deep, Soviet military communications, submarine movements, even raw conversations between officers who thought their words were secure. The intelligence was priceless. For nearly a decade, Washington listened in on Moscow's underwater lifeline. Some historians argue that Ivy Bells gave the U.S. a decisive edge in the Cold War, allowing them to anticipate Soviet moves before they happened. But like all secrets, this one didn't stay buried. In the early 1980s, a U.S. Navy employee named Ronald Pelton betrayed the operation to the Soviets for just $35,000. The KGB learned of Ivy Bells, and when the Americans returned to retrieve their wiretap, they found only silence. The Soviets had discovered the device. Pelton's betrayal remains one of the most damaging acts of espionage in American history. Still, the very idea of Ivy Bells raised a terrifying question. If the Americans could tap Soviet cables, could the Soviets do the same? And what if those taps weren't just listening devices, but sabotage waiting to happen? An unseen hand capable of severing the lifelines of nations in an instant. And espionage didn't stop with cables. Both sides developed acoustic surveillance networks, vast arrays of underwater microphones designed to track submarine movements. The U.S. built SOSUS, the sound surveillance system, a network of hydrophones stretched across the Atlantic and Pacific, capable of picking up the faintest hum of a Soviet propeller thousands of miles away. This gave the U.S. the ability to stalk Soviet submarines like predators in the dark. In some cases, American attack submarines would trail Soviet ballistic missile subs for weeks at a time, undetected, close enough to hear the creak of their hulls. It was a terrifying cat-and-mouse game. One mistake, one collision, and nuclear war could erupt. And sometimes those mistakes happened. In 1981, a Soviet submarine ran aground on the coast of Sweden, just miles from a Swedish naval base. To this day, no one knows whether it was an accident or a failed espionage mission. The Swedes called it the Whiskey on the Rocks incident, and for days, the world watched as a nuclear-armed Soviet vessel sat stranded in hostile waters. The crisis ended without bloodshed, but the image of a submarine caught red-handed fueled paranoia across Europe. Meanwhile, in the Atlantic, American submarines weren't just listening, they were stealing. One mission, later revealed in fragments, involved sneaking into Soviet waters to photograph the screws, the propellers of Soviet submarines. The shape of a screw determined how noisy a submarine was, and knowing its design gave the U.S. an edge in tracking it. Divers risked their lives to capture these images, sometimes under ice, sometimes in waters patrolled by Soviet ships. But the most mysterious missions were the ones aimed at retrieving what the ocean had swallowed. We already saw how the U.S. attempted to recover parts of the Soviet submarine K-129 with the Glomar Explorer, an operation so secret it created a phrase still used today: "We can neither confirm nor deny." That secrecy wasn't unique, it was standard. Both sides knew the ocean floor was littered with wreckage, missiles, aircraft, even entire submarines that contained priceless secrets. And both sides were willing to risk everything to retrieve them. In some cases, the search itself was more dangerous than the reward. Divers pushed beyond safe depths. Submarines operated in waters so shallow they risked discovery, and all of it had to be hidden from public view. The stakes weren't just military, they were existential. Every time a wiretap was placed, every time a sub trailed its rival, the risk of exposure loomed. If the Soviets had caught American divers inside the Sea of Okhotsk, they wouldn't have hesitated to open fire. If an American submarine had collided fatally with a Soviet one during a pursuit, leaders in Washington and Moscow might have assumed the worst, that war had already begun. And perhaps most haunting of all is this: we don't know how many of these missions actually failed. The files that are public describe success stories and carefully sanitized accidents. But what about the missions that vanished, the submarines that never came home, the families told only that their loved ones were lost at sea? The ocean keeps its secrets well. Even today, fragments of those stories surface. Fishermen in the Barents Sea drag up twisted metal from forgotten collisions. Explorers with deep-sea drones stumble across wrecks never announced to the world. And in each case, the silence speaks louder than words. Governments would rather leave these wrecks undiscovered than admit how close we came to disaster. What makes these operations so chilling is how invisible they were. Nuclear missiles, tanks, and parades made headlines. But the real war, the one that could have ended the world, was being fought silently beneath the waves. No journalists, no cameras, no oversight. Just men in steel coffins, chasing each other through the abyss, one sonar ping away from Armageddon. And this war didn't end with the Cold War. The tactics, the wiretaps, the espionage, they left behind a blueprint. A reminder that the ocean is not just a place of trade and travel, but a battlefield hidden from view. So, the question remains, if so much was hidden during the Cold War, what secrets still lie beneath the ocean today? Are there still wiretaps recording messages on the seafloor? Are there still wrecks loaded with nuclear weapons, rusting silently in the dark? The answers may be out there, but they are guarded by layers of secrecy as thick as the ocean itself. And in the final act of this story, we'll confront the ultimate truth. The ocean was never just a frontier. It was a weapon, a place where humanity came closer to destruction than we ever dared to admit. The Cold War has been over for more than 30 years. The Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union dissolved, and leaders shook hands, declaring the era of fear to be behind us. But the ocean remembers. The ocean doesn't forget. Beneath its waves still lie the scars of battles that were never spoken of, the husks of submarines that never surfaced, and the whispers of secrets so dangerous that even today, governments prefer silence to truth. Steel tombs rest on the seabed, Soviet submarines carrying nuclear warheads, American vessels lost during shadow operations, wrecks quietly corroding in the dark. These wrecks are not just relics of history. They are time bombs, some literally. Nuclear reactors, torpedoes, and ballistic missiles lie entombed, their radioactive cores slowly bleeding into saltwater. Marine biologists warn that these hidden graves could one day leak catastrophically. Yet, for decades, officials have spoken in vague tones, denying, deflecting, or simply refusing to acknowledge what lurks below. It's easy to believe the Cold War ended neatly, like a book with a final page. But beneath the sea, the war never truly ended. It evolved. Consider this. In the 1970s, a secret mission called unveils changed everything. American submariners planted wiretaps on Soviet undersea cables, listening in on Moscow's most private conversations. That operation was betrayed by Ronald Pelton, selling it to the KGB for just a handful of dollars. But what unveils revealed was bigger than the betrayal. It showed the world, quietly, secretly, that the oceans had become more than a battlefield. They had become the nervous system of civilization itself. Today, submarine cables no longer carry only military orders. They carry almost everything: your phone calls, your bank transactions, your emails, even the video you're watching right now. 95% of global internet traffic flows through cables lying silently on the seabed. In other words, the secret war beneath the ocean never stopped. It simply shifted. The players have changed, the technology has advanced, but the battlefield is the same. Military planners admit this quietly. Those cables are targets, not just for espionage as they were in the Cold War, but for sabotage. Cut a cable in the wrong place, and you don't just silence a navy, you plunge entire countries into chaos. Imagine financial markets freezing, hospitals losing contact, air traffic control going blind. The modern world depends on threads thinner than your wrist, lying vulnerable in the dark. And the submarines themselves? They never went away. The US, Russia, China, Britain, and France all maintain fleets of ballistic missile submarines, the so-called boomers. Their mission has not changed since the 1960s. They disappear beneath the waves, patrol silently for months, and wait for a signal that everyone hopes never comes. Each one carries enough firepower to end civilization. The doctrine is chilling in its simplicity: deterrence through silence. If the homeland is destroyed in a surprise attack, these submarines will strike back. They are the second strike guarantee, which means right now, as you hear these words, submarines with nuclear weapons are silently roaming the oceans, unseen, unheard, and armed with Armageddon. It is a reminder that the world's survival has never depended on technology alone. It has always depended on people. Flesh and blood individuals making impossible decisions in the most claustrophobic, high-stakes environments imaginable. Men like Vasily Arkhipov, who stopped a nuclear launch during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Men like Sergei Preminin, who gave his life in a burning submarine to prevent a reactor meltdown. Or countless unnamed officers, faced with sonar blips that looked like enemy attacks, who chose restraint over retaliation. But restraint is fragile, and silence is dangerous. Think about the accidents we know about, the ones too big to hide. The K-219 in 1986, leaking radioactive gases into the sea near Bermuda. The K-278 Komsomolets, which sank in 1989 with nuclear torpedoes still on board, now corroding on the seabed of the Norwegian Sea. Or the Kursk disaster in 2000, long after the Cold War, when a Russian submarine exploded and sank with all 118 crew aboard, shocking the world into remembering that the ocean is never safe. For every Kursk we heard about, how many other disasters remain buried in classified archives? How many submarines vanished without explanation, their missions erased from official history? Even now, families of lost submariners in both the US and Russia often receive only vague condolences. Their loved ones died in accidents, they are told. But the truth? The truth is often left at the bottom of the sea. And yet, despite the secrecy, fragments leak through. Retired officers write memoirs. Divers speak in whispers. Declassified documents reveal missions that sound like fiction. Submarines trailing each other so closely they nearly collided. Divers photographing Soviet propellers beneath sheets of ice. Intelligence agencies scouring the ocean floor for lost nuclear weapons. The picture that emerges is haunting. The Cold War didn't just bring us close to nuclear war on land. It brought us within seconds of nuclear catastrophe in the ocean, again and again without the public ever knowing. And the most disturbing part? That shadow war still shapes our world today. The cables that carry our lives. The submarines that patrol silently with missiles. The surveillance systems listening in the dark. These are not relics. They are realities. In fact, many experts warn that the ocean may be the next great frontier of conflict. Cyber warfare, espionage, and sabotage may not begin in space or on land, but beneath the waves, where no one is watching. So, the question becomes, if history nearly ended in silence once before, what's stopping it from happening again? What happens if a submarine collision is mistaken for an attack? What happens if a cable cut is blamed on sabotage? What happens if one commander, isolated in the abyss, decides to act on incomplete information? It's easy to dismiss these fears as paranoia, but history teaches us otherwise. History shows us that restraint, not strategy, saved us in the past. And restraint is not a guarantee. The ocean is still out there, silent, holding its secrets. Secrets of wrecks that still leak radiation. Secrets of missions no government will ever admit. Secrets of how close we came to destroying ourselves without ever knowing. And maybe that's the scariest truth of all. We survived the Cold War not because the system worked, but because individuals hesitated. Because men under unbearable pressure chose silence over fire. We may never know how many times they saved us. But we know this. Without them, none of us would be here. So what can we learn? That the most dangerous wars are not the ones we see on the news. They're the ones fought in silence, in shadows out of sight. Wars that leave no parades, no headlines, only echoes in the deep. And if you listen closely, maybe you can hear it. The groan of a rusting hull deep below. The faint hum of a reactor still ticking in darkness. The whisper of data rushing through cables, carrying the secrets of the world. The secret war beneath the ocean was never declared, never reported, and never truly ended. It is still there, silent, waiting. The question is, when the silence breaks again, will we survive? Or will the echoes finally become thunder? And here is where you come in. These stories aren't just history. They are warnings. Warnings about technology, about secrecy, about the dangers of believing the ocean is nothing more than water. What do you think? Should governments keep these operations buried, locked in classified files, never to be revealed? Or is it time we face the truth, that our survival has always depended on human restraint in the face of unimaginable power? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because silence is dangerous, but conversation is power. And if you want more stories like this, stories of shadows, secrets, and truths too dangerous to tell, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who loves history, and subscribe for more, because the sea still holds its secrets, and together maybe we can bring them to the surface.